Hello, my name is Kathy Crawford, and I'd like to welcome you to this HACCP Consulting Group 5 Minutes Forward presentation on moving from SQF to FSMA Sanitary Transportation Rule Compliance. Today we're going to briefly discuss some areas where SQF compliance may not be enough to ensure compliance to the Sanitary Transportation Rule. Quite a few papers, presentations, and courses on the FSMA preventive controls rules for human and animal food have been presented by various companies and organizations, but not much attention has been paid to sanitary transportation. A closer look at this rule, which was effective in April of this year, shows there may be gaps in your SQF programs as compared to the regulation. The rule's detailed, but for this 5 minutes forward session, I've narrowed it down to about 5 areas which may need some improvement. So let's take a look at those. The first area we're going to look at is use of the term qualified individual. A qualified individual is defined in the Preventive Controls Rule, but not in Subpart O of FSMA, which is the sanitary transportation section. In this section it says, for failures of temperature control or other potentially unsafe conditions, food shall not be sold or distributed unless a qualified individual determines this did not cause unsafe food. The closest comparison to this requirement that I see in SQF is the section on non-conforming product or equipment. Under circumstances where something is suspect or known to be unsafe, it needs to be kept out of commerce, and SQF does address this need for control. But each site determines how these controlled items might be released, and the code doesn't say anything about the person who might make those decisions. So in my opinion, a qualified individual who would make decisions pertaining to sanitary transportation when there might be a failure or an unsafe condition should be a person who has had HACCP training and preventive controls training. So the action item for this particular concern is to clearly define responsibility in your system, including necessary qualifications and competencies for those individuals who might make food safety decisions when failures occur. The second section where there may be differences is in discussing previous cargo and previous sanitation. This is pertaining to bulk transport, so let's clarify that. Bulk transport includes the movement of food that's not packaged, and it comes in contact with the transport equipment. So this could be something like a tanker for a liquid food product or a hopper truck. And the purpose of this is to ensure that we prevent cross-contamination as well as cross-contact. So under FSMA, for bulk transport, if the shipper requests it, the carrier must identify previous cargo and details of the most recent cleaning. Now this relates to SQF and SQF's requirements for traceability and for sanitation. Under traceability, SQF really emphasizes tracing the product, but not necessarily the equipment. Many companies know where food came from and where it went, but do they also know what it touched and the history of that container or that food contact surface? On a large scale, and for FSMA, consider making sure that this is possible for tanker trucks. For continuous improvement, consider making this possible for other items like buckets and bins and utensils. On the sanitation part of this, SQF requires sanitation for equipment and food handling areas. The missing link might be the ability to tie sanitation details using traceability to equipment and to be able to be prepared to share those results specifically for transportation operations. So the action item for this section is to specifically include equipment in your traceability program and ensure transport operations are included in your sanitation SOPs and records. The next area includes having documented procedures for how temperatures are maintained and how bulk vehicle shipments are controlled, just as we discussed in the previous slide. SQF requires procedures for inspection and temperature checks, as well as ensuring equipment is set, checked, and recorded. But it doesn't clearly require the site to define how they will achieve these controls. A process is always better than relying on inspections. In this case, temperature checks are good, and they are required. But defining what is being done to ensure success in the first place is somewhat absent from the SQF standard. So consider clearly defining the maintenance and operation requirements for temperature control equipment, as well as details for bulk vehicle shipment procedures. And be sure to incorporate those procedures into your traceability and sanitation steps as needed. So the action item is to indicate not just what you check, but indicate in procedures how compliance will be assured. The next area of potential concern is record retention. Under FSMA, there's a requirement that records, procedures, and agreements be kept 12 months beyond the last date when that piece of information was needed or used. SQF requires a history of changes to your procedures and record retention to meet customer and regulatory requirements. So essentially, these match, and compliance with SQF should mean compliance with FSMA. But if you look closely at SQF, in my opinion, it doesn't really clearly prescribe retention of procedures and agreements as clearly as FSMA does. So be careful to pay attention to that. And also be sure to understand the time frame for retention. For example, if you transport food for Acme Food Company for 5 years and then stop, you might need a 6-year retention time for certain transportation records. Or if you hire John or Jane Doe as a carrier who works for you, and they work for you for 5 years and then they quit, the record associated with their training that was done upon hire needs to be saved for 6 years. So the action item pertaining to record retention is that you should work with human resources and other departments, take a good look at your food safety system, and ensure that records, agreements, and procedures are retained as needed. The last section we're going to look at is carrier training. If a carrier is responsible, even in part, for sanitary conditions, then they have to be trained in 3 topics: food safety awareness, sanitary practices, and their specific job responsibilities. The SQF code does a good job requiring training for various aspects of good manufacturing practices, good distribution practices, and other necessary steps for food safety. But training programs are designed specifically by each site. So make sure that when looking at your training program, you take FSMA into account. The action item is to provide or obtain training for all carriers. You can go to the FDA website and just search for training for carriers covered by the Sanitary Transportation of Human and Animal Food Rule. And there you'll find a free training session that does a pretty good job of providing an overview of these requirements. So in closing, I'd like to thank you for attending this 5 minutes forward session on moving from SQF to compliance with the Sanitary Transportation Rule. I know I went a little bit over 5 minutes. I hope it was beneficial to you because this rule can be complicated. If you need more help, please contact us at info@haccpcg.com. Thank you.